Today I want to talk about something that I believe is the most important geopolitical crisis of our time. The fragile April 2026 ceasefire between the United States and Iran. It is not about Donald Trump's rhetoric on cable news. It is not about the daily updates on the naval blockade. And it is not about the temporary, highly conditional opening of the Strait of Hormuz. The most important question is this: why is the United States, the most powerful military force in human history, fundamentally trapped in a conflict it cannot win, cannot afford, and cannot leave? And the answer, when you look at it carefully, is deeply unsettling. The United States has walked blindfolded into an unfixable geographic and economic nightmare. It cannot advance, it cannot retreat, and it cannot stay where it is. And today I want to explain exactly why, step by step, in simple, easy to understand English. So let's begin. To understand what is actually happening right now, you need to understand the underlying principle of a choke point empire. Throughout history, global superpowers do not rule by occupying every square inch of the globe. They rule by controlling the vital arteries of global trade. If you control the choke points, you control the world. Think about the British Empire and the Suez Canal. That crisis started in 1956 when Egypt nationalized the canal and Great Britain, alongside France and Israel, tried to take it back by force. They had overwhelming military superiority. They had the ships, the planes, the guns, but they lost. Why? Because geography always defeats ideology. The British realized, in a moment of sheer imperial terror, that they could bomb the region into rubble, but they could not permanently secure the waterway without bankrupting their own empire and inviting global economic collapse. That was the moment the sun finally set on the British Empire. Today, the United States is facing its own 1956 Suez moment. But the geography is much, much worse. We are talking about the Strait of Hormuz. I want you to visualize this. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow ribbon of water between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. At its narrowest point, it is just 21 miles wide. And through this tiny, vulnerable corridor flows roughly 20% of the world's entire oil supply. It is the jugular vein of the global industrial economy. When the United States and Israel launched massive airstrikes against Iran in February 2026, the strategic goal was absolute domination. The goal was to decapitate the leadership, destroy the nuclear infrastructure, and force a total surrender. But military force only works if it translates into geographic and economic security. Instead, we are looking at a fragile two-week ceasefire brokered in Islamabad, where Iran still effectively controls the flow of commercial traffic through that 21-mile choke point. The United States has parked a massive naval blockade right outside Iranian waters. It looks incredibly powerful. It looks like dominance. But here is what makes the 2026 Iran conflict even more devastating and unprecedented than the British failure in 1956. Let's imagine that the United States decides it is tired of these tense, indirect negotiations in Pakistan. Let's imagine the president decides to execute his threat, drop the ceasefire, and bomb Iran back to the Stone Ages, because Tehran refuses to surrender its enriched uranium. Now, on the surface, some might say the US military is vastly superior. Just destroy the remaining launch sites, sink the remaining ships, and force the strait open. But here's why. That thinking completely misreads the modern reality of asymmetric warfare. If Washington pulls the trigger on a full resumption of hostilities, they trigger an automatic, unstoppable chain reaction. Let me walk you through this. Step 1. The US resumes its massive bombing campaign. Precision-guided munitions strike deep inside Iranian territory, targeting the IRGC, the nuclear sites, and the command bunkers. Step 2. Iran does not try to fight the US Navy ship for ship. That would be suicide. Instead, they activate their asymmetric assets. They use mobile hidden anti-ship missile batteries buried deep in the Zagros Mountains. They unleash thousands of cheap, disposable swarm drones. And crucially, they deploy smart sea mines into that 21-mile wide Strait of Hormuz. It scatters, it hides, it uses asymmetric tactics. Step 3. The moment a single commercial oil tanker is struck or even seriously threatened, maritime insurance rates skyrocket to impossible numbers. Commercial shipping companies immediately halt all traffic. The Strait of Hormuz is officially closed. 20% of the world's oil vanishes from the market overnight. Step 4. Now here's where things get really serious for the global economy. Brent crude oil doesn't just dip. It rockets from $90 a barrel to $150, maybe even $200 a barrel. The global energy market goes into cardiac arrest. The cost of manufacturing, the cost of transportation, the cost of everyday groceries in the United States and Europe doubles in a matter of weeks. You trigger an instant, crushing global recession right in the middle of a delicate election cycle. Step 5. China, which imports a massive percentage of its oil from the Middle East, can no longer sit on the sidelines. Facing an existential threat to its own economy, Beijing is forced to intervene. They begin actively breaking the US blockade, providing financial lifelines, or even military cover to secure their energy supply. The United States is suddenly dragged from a regional containment mission into a multi-front, global superpower standoff. This is why the United States cannot simply restart the war and bomb its way out of the problem. You cannot bomb a shipping lane into being safe. This is the escalation trap. But here is where things get really serious for Washington. So, if the United States cannot resume the hot war without crashing the global economy, what is the alternative? The alternative is what we are seeing right now, a massive, indefinite naval blockade, a state of permanent high alert purgatory. The United States parks its carrier, strike groups, its destroyers, and its cruisers in the region, essentially acting as an incredibly expensive armed guard for the Middle East. This brings us to the second trap, the trap of the forever bleed. Let's look at the actual mathematics of modern warfare. The United States is currently using highly sophisticated, multi-million-dollar interceptor missiles to shoot down incoming Iranian drones and cheap ballistic projectiles. A standard SM-2 surface-to-air missile fired from a US Navy destroyer costs roughly $2.1 million. The drone it is shooting down, it might cost $20,000 to manufacture. Do the math. The United States is spending millions of dollars to destroy thousands of dollars. It is an economic hemorrhage over the course of the February and March hostilities. The United States fundamentally depleted its ammunition stockpiles in the Middle East. You cannot sustain that level of expenditure without hollowing out your military readiness for other theaters, like the Indo-Pacific or Eastern Europe. In 2003, the United States sent roughly 130,000 troops to Iraq, promising a swift, decisive victory. Trillions of dollars later, the region remained deeply unstable. Today, maintaining this blockade off the coast of Iran, patrolling the waters, turning back ships, burning through fuel, maintenance cycles, and high-tech munitions requires an astronomical, unending bleed of American resources. And the psychological trap keeping Washington there has a name. That is the sunk cost fallacy. And it is one of the most powerful and dangerous forces in human decision-making. The sunk cost fallacy is the belief that because you have already invested so much blood, treasure, and political capital into a strategy, you must keep investing more to avoid looking like you failed. The US military has suffered casualties. They have spent billions. President Trump has claimed victory on national television To pull back the blockade now would look like an admission of defeat. So they stay, they patrol, they bleed. The United States is locked into a strategy of infinite containment, and that is where the trap of the sunk cost fallacy begins. Now let me tell you what happens next, because this is the part no one is talking about. And now I want to tell you something that most mainstream media is completely hiding from you. When you turn on the news, you hear about this ceasefire as a moment of relief. You hear politicians taking a victory lap, claiming that the naval blockade is working, that 9 ships were turned back, and that Iran has been forced to the negotiating table in Pakistan, but behind closed doors, intelligence analysts and military strategists know the terrifying reality. The ceasefire is not a US victory. It is an Iranian rearmament phase. While the diplomats are sitting in hotel conference rooms in Islamabad arguing over phased agreements and sanctions relief, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is not standing still. They are actively utilizing this pause in fighting to reorganize their command structures. They are relocating their mobile launchers. And most importantly, they are regenerating their ballistic missile force. Let me say that again. They are not negotiating peace. They are reloading. Every single day the ceasefire holds, Iran is solidifying its operational control over the transit routes in the Strait of Hormuz. They are establishing the new normal where commercial vessels must coordinate with the IRGC Navy to pass. The United States thinks it paused the clock to dictate terms. Iran knows it reset the board to build leverage. Every time military planners war game a prolonged blockade or a renewed strike campaign in this region, the US loses. Let me repeat that. Every single time they lose, because you cannot sustain a permanent blue water naval blockade against a deeply entrenched, asymmetrical land power that is willing to wait you out. Iran doesn't have to win a conventional naval battle. They just have to survive, keep the threat of closure alive, and let the US Navy slowly go bankrupt, patrolling the waters. This is the hidden truth of the April 2026 ceasefire. It is a mirage. It is a tactical pause that overwhelmingly benefits the side fighting on its home turf. So how does this end? Where do we go from here? This conflict does not exist in isolation. It is connected to everything else happening in the world right now. It is connected to the shifting energy demands in Asia. It is connected to the exhaustion of the American taxpayer. It is connected to the rise of new regional power brokers. The United States is currently operating under the delusion that it can still impose a unipolar 1990s-style hegemony over the Middle East. It believes it can dictate the terms of trade, dictate the terms of nuclear enrichment, and dictate who sails through the Strait of Hormuz solely through the threat of overwhelming violence. But the era of absolute American regional hegemony is over. The only viable path forward is an incredibly difficult pill for Washington to swallow. The United States must accept a multipolar Middle East. It must accept a negotiated, structured withdrawal from the posture of infinite containment. It has to allow regional powers, including Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and yes, even China, to share the burden of securing maritime trade. It has to accept a diplomatic resolution that lifts the blockade in exchange for verifiable but realistic limitations on Iran's nuclear material, rather than demanding total, humiliating surrender. Now, on the surface, some might say that sounds like American weakness. But let's use a reframe pivot. That is not weakness, that is strategic preservation. True power is not bleeding yourself dry to prove a point in the desert. True power is knowing when a geopolitical arrangement no longer serves your national interest, and having the discipline to walk away and refocus your strength where it actually matters. Saving the American military from a multi-trillion-dollar quagmire is the ultimate act of national defense. Whether the current administration has the political courage, the foresight, and the discipline to take that path? That is the most important question of our time. And honestly, I don't know the answer. Let's review exactly what we've covered. The geographic trap. The US cannot simply bomb Iran into submission because geography allows Iran to close the 21-mile Strait of Hormuz, which leads to an immediate global economic crisis. The escalation trap. Resuming hostilities triggers a chain reaction, pulling in global powers like China to secure their energy, which leads to a massive widening of the war. The economic lead. Maintaining the naval blockade is mathematically unsustainable because the US is firing $2 million missiles at $20,000 drones, which leads to the depletion of American military readiness. The sunk cost fallacy. Washington remains trapped in the region to avoid the appearance of defeat, which leads to a permanent state of high alert purgatory. The hidden truth. The current ceasefire is actually an Iranian rearmament phase because Tehran is using the pause to regenerate its ballistic forces, which leads to a stronger Iranian position the longer the talks drag on. If you want to understand the real forces driving global conflicts, make sure you subscribe to the channel for more geopolitical analysis explained in simple, clear English. And I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments, do you think the United States should permanently lift the naval blockade to secure a peace deal? Or do you believe maintaining military pressure is the only way to stop Iran? Let me know down below. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one.